The gavel detonated against oak, and the courtroom flinched as Judge Helena Ward said, "Order, now," and the word cracked. Gasps rippled the gallery and a microphone squealed. "Darius Cole," said Victor Harrow, "was killed on purpose," and the air thinned to glass. Cass Harrow felt her lungs lock as cameras inhaled her fear. Nora Quinn said, "Breathe, Cass," and her palm steadied the table. Marcus Bell smiled for the evening news and said, "At last a witness with courage." Lila Harrow touched her pearls as if they might pray. Rafael Ortiz scribbled a note that looked like a price. June Whittaker hid a tremor by folding her hands twice. Judge Ward said, "Finish your sentence, Mr. Cole," and the room leaned in. Darius said, "The death was arranged to protect quarterly numbers." Cass said, "Say who?" but the words barely cleared her teeth. Nora said, "Not yet," and her eyes measured exits and enemies. Marcus said, "Motive is obvious," and savored the cameras. Lila said, "Grief makes saints of the least deserving to the air." Raphael said, "Names later, proof first," and marked a page with an X. Judge Ward rapped the bench and said, "We will have order and evidence." Cass said, "If I speak, I drown. If I stay silent, I burn." Nora said, "We do neither." We win, and floor seemed to tilt. When Judge Ward recessed, the room kept ringing like a bell in Cass Harrow's ribs, and she stayed as if the chair could anchor her. Nora Quinn said, "They'll chase the soundbite, not the proof," and slid a legal pad toward steady hands. Cass said, "Darius worked for my father 15 years. He knows where the bones are," and the words tasted metallic. Marcus Bell drifted near with cameras and said, "Truth is heavy, let me carry it," like a slogan. Nora said, "He'll carry it to a fundraiser," and capped her pen like a blade. Lila Harrow dabbed at dry eyes and said, "Grief makes saints," to a microphone that adored lies. Rafael Ortiz hovered at the doorway and said, "I'll map his story against the money." Cass pictured Maya ignoring another call and said, "My daughter hates what the name means," and felt a door lock. Nora said, "We create a new meaning," and tapped the margin where strategy lives. The bailiff's keys chimed like cuffs under velvet. Cass said, "I didn't kill him," to no one. Nora said, "Then we prove who did and why they need you gone," and her voice held. Marcus said, "Justice is swift," and smiled for a lens that loves swiftness more than care. Cass pressed her palms flat and said, "I will not drown today," and the hallway swallowed the echo. The judge's chambers smelled of old books and rain, and the carpet dulled panic. Judge Helena Ward said, "Mr. Cole, you burned the room, can you stand cross?" And her eyes tested steel. Darius Cole said, "I'm tired of paying for other people's sins," and the word sagged. Marcus Bell said, "The state is grateful for your courage," and adjusted his tie. Nora Quinn laughed without smiling and said, "Courage rented by the hour rarely returns the deposit." Cass Harrow stared at a portrait of Victor Harrow and said, "Tell the court what you just told yourself." Darius said, "I told myself I should have said it while he was alive," and the consonants scraped. Judge Ward said, "Then say it now, under oath with both hands where I can see them." Marcus said, "We will protect this witness," and sounded like a campaign ad. Nora said, "Protect the evidence first," and clicked her pen like a metronome. Cass said, "My father kept secrets that bought time and lost souls." Darius said he planned to fix it after this quarter, and swallowed the rest. Judge Ward said, "You will not curate your truth," and pointed to the chair like a doc. Lila Harrow lingered in the doorway and said, "Family deserves privacy," and left lilies and threat behind. The hallway vibrated with gossip that moved faster than law, and Trent Avery slid beside Rafael Ortiz, with a grin like a camera flash. Trent said, "Double your rate if it bleeds on tape," and dangled a card. Rafael said, "I work for truth," and pocketed the offer without taking it. Pam Wilcox spoke into a recorder and said, "Insiders whisper the heiress iced the patriarch like poison candy." Detective Colin Mercer shuffled past with a box of exhibits and said, Make room as if chain of custody were a hallway game. Nora Quinn said, Mercer trims corners when the corners trim back, and kept walking. Cass Harrow watched the box tilt and said, he always resented my father, and swallowed old memories. Raphael said, resentment leaves fingerprints, and noted the case number. Lila Harrow drifted by with donors on her phone and said, stability is compassion, while her heels clicked. Trent said, America loves a family eating itself, and tried to film Cass's face. Cass said, find a better meal, and kept her eyes forward. Raphael said, names, evidence, motive, like a prayer he could keep. The wall clock ticked through somebody's future, and the door to court called everyone back. Evening turned a glass lobby into a mirror that doubled Cass Harrow into a ghost. Lila Harrow arrived with lilies and strategy and said, you never belonged in this building, like a blessing twisted. Cass said, I belong to its debts and its dead, and squared her shoulders against the marble. Lila said, step aside gracefully, and I can protect Maya from the public teeth, and touched her pearls. Cass said, you don't get to say my daughter's name, and the lights hummed like nerves. Lila said, control is the only comfort in grief, and looked up at the logo as if it were scripture. Cass said, then your comfort costs blood, and the words fogged the glass. Rafael Ortiz pushed through the revolving door and said, you hired me to find the killer. I'll start with the living, and lifted a notebook. Cass said, start with the will, and felt something unlock behind her ribs. Lila said, family first, and walked away as her heels wrote deadlines. Raphael said, forgeries leave shadows when the light is right, and scanned fixtures. Cass said, bring a brighter light, and the building seemed to dim. Nora Quinn called and said, tomorrow we cut into that will, and hung up before doubt could answer. Cass whispered, I will not be what they prefer, and the echo kept the promise. The will lay on velvet like a quiet weapon, and Nora Quinn said, clauses hide choices, while the UV lamp hummed. Cass Harrow said, my father trusted paper more than people, and tried to steady her breath. Rafael Ortiz said, ink ages honestly. Forgery wears perfume, and clicked the light. Nora said, this codicil shifts control to you, and binds a trust to Maya, and marked a margin. Cass said, he wanted me chained to repair, not revenge, and watched fibers glow wrong. Raphael said, feathering at the stroke indicates newer ink on older stock, and adjusted focus. Nora said, date mismatch plus pressure variance equals a posthumous author, and looked up. Cass said, Lila loved edits more than truth, and felt heat under her skin. Raphael said, forger's rhythm slips on curves, the wrist confesses even in disguise, and smiled thinly. Nora said, we prove the forgery, we unspool motive, and stacked exhibits. Cass said, if the will was patched to steer me, who held the needle, and closed her eyes. Raphael said, follow the fun called outreach, then the pen, and killed the UV glow. Nora said, chain of custody starts now, and sealed the room with her voice. In court, the projector sliced dust like tiny verdicts, and Marcus Bell said, ambition sharpened her motive, as charts bloomed. Cass Harrow felt her name become a headline, and kept her chin level. Nora Quinn rose and said, inference sold as science is just theater with slides, and the gallery stirred. Marcus said, stock pressure, board conflict, contested legacy, and paced like a metronome. Cass said, he reduces a life to bullet points, and unclenched her hand. Nora said, objection to speculation masquerading as proof, and glanced at the clock. Judge Helena Ward said, sustain your facts, counselor, not your flair, and tapped the bench. Marcus said, her texts reveal urgency, and flashed red bubbles cropped to sting. Nora said, context is not a luxury, it is accuracy, and demanded the thread. Cass said, those words begged for reform, not a body, and met the jury's eyes. Lila Harrow watched like a marble saint and never blinked. Rafael Ortiz wrote, narrative warfare favors lighting, and underlined motive twice. Judge Ward said, "Proceed with evidence or proceed to sit," and the room cooled. The motel smelled like old rain and fried hope, and Rafael Ortiz said, "Your confession rewired the day," as Darius Cole locked the door. Darius said, "Victor believed he could retire the sins without retiring the sinners," and rubbed his brow. Rafael said, "Names and ledgers, not sermons," and slid a notepad across laminate. Darius said, "Lila authorized payments through a fund called Outreach," and kept his voice low. Rafael said, "Who signed the vouchers?" and tapped the pen 3 times. Darius said, "I did, and I hate that sentence," and stared at the neon bleed. Rafael said, "Why now?" and watched the window flicker. Darius said, "Because the dead don't improve and the living can," and exhaled. Rafael said, "Price for truth is risk. I will pay in shadows," and pocketed a copy. Trent Avery rose from behind the shower curtain and said, "America needs this," and grinned. Rafael said, "Turn that off or I break the toy," and took 1 step. Trent said, "Public interest loves blood," and backed away. Darius said, "I'm buying smaller ghosts," and closed his eyes. Cass Harrow watched the city blink like a tired heart, and finally heard Maya answer with a sigh. Maya said, "You're famous for the worst reasons, and let silence do the rest." Cass said, "I'm fighting to keep our name from being a weapon," and pressed the glass. Maya said, "It already cut me," and let the words hang. Cass said, "I never wanted the company more than I wanted you," and tasted metal. Maya said, "Then prove it in ways that don't trend," and shifted the phone. Cass said, "I will pay what the company owes, even if the board howls," and meant it. Maya said, "Promises are cheap until they cost you," and the line crackled. Cass said, "I will show up without cameras, and with casseroles," and almost laughed. Maya said, "I like pancakes," and a smile edged the sentence. Cass said, "Then pancakes at 7, even if I lose sleep," and the room softened. Maya said, "Don't lose me to save yourself," and paused. Cass said, "I won't," and set an alarm she would not break. The city kept blinking like it believed her. On the stand, Detective Colin Mercer dabbed his forehead as Nora Quinn paced the length of a rule. Nora said, "When did you seal the evidence bag?" and waited through the paper shuffle. Mercer said, "Immediately after collection," and avoided her eyes. Nora said, "Then explain the 4-hour gap in the log," and held up the form. Mercer said, "Clerical error," and tugged his collar. Nora said, "Error that opened a door wide enough to wheel in a verdict," and stopped close. Marcus Bell said, "Asked and answered," and lifted his chin. Judge Helena Ward said, "Asked and avoided," overruled, and the gallery hushed. Cass Harrow watched sweat choose a path that honesty had not. Nora said, "Who had access during the gap?" and pointed to the chain. Mercer said, "Unknown," and flinched. Nora said, "Unknown is not a person," and lowered her voice. Marcus said, "Counsel badgers," and sat back. Judge Ward said, "Counsel exposes," and nodded once. Nora said, "Detective, did you trim corners to fit a story?" and Mercer blinked twice. The handwriting expert droned about stroke pressure and ink age until jurors blinked in slow unison. Nora Quinn said, "One sentence? Was this signature added after Victor Harrow died?" The expert said, "Yes," with the calm of someone paid to be certain. Marcus Bell leaned forward and said, "In your opinion?" The expert replied, "In my field's consensus." Cass Harrow felt a fragile hope lift inside her ribs like a paper lantern. Lila Harrow's stare could have etched glass, unblinking at the man with the magnifier. Rafael Ortiz wrote, "Science as scalpel," in his notes and circled it twice. Nora said, "So the document was altered posthumously," and the expert nodded. Marcus said, "A theory, not a fact," but his voice lacked its usual steel. The judge said, "The jury will weigh testimony accordingly." Cass's palms stayed flat, holding down the tremor that wanted out. Lila crossed her legs slowly, pearls clicking once. Nora glanced at Cass, a silent yes between them. The air tasted faintly of dust and change. In the basement cafeteria, June Whittaker sat alone, peeling the crust from a sandwich like it was a ritual. Pam Wilcox slid into the seat across from her and said, "Jury food is lousy, but guilt tastes worse." June said, "I'm impartial." Pam leaned in and said, "Your brother died at Harrow West. Impartial is a costume." June's jaw set. "If you say his name on air, I'll never forgive you." Pam smiled and said, "Sweetheart, forgiveness is not our business model." Rafael Ortiz, 2 tables away, watched over the rim of his coffee. He wrote in his notebook, "Juror compromised, verify quietly." The hum of vending machines masked the quiet venom. June pushed the crusts into a napkin and said nothing more. Pam's recorder light winked like a signal. Rafael tapped his pencil twice, a silent promise to dig. Outside the double doors, the bailiff's voice called jurors back to court, and June stood without looking back. Cass Harrow unlocked Victor's old office, the air thick with paper and silence. A hidden drawer gave way to a small recorder and a folded note reading "In case courage comes late." She pressed play. Victor's voice, ragged, said, "Lila, if you're hearing this, you win, unless Cass learns what we paid to keep the plants open." Cass whispered, "What did you pay?" The voice answered, "People," and stopped. Her knees weakened, fingers tight on the desk edge. Rafael Ortiz stood in the doorway, shadow cutting across the carpet, and said, "The world should hear that." Cass shook her head. "Not if it burns the workers first." Rafael said, "Truth without cost is a rumor." Cass replied, "I can't sacrifice them to save me." The recorder clicked off, its weight suddenly greater than its size. Outside, rain tapped the glass like it wanted in. Lila Harrow's penthouse glittered with champagne and careful lies. She stood before a semicircle of donors and said, "Stability is compassion." Marcus Bell, drink in hand, added, "And justice is stability's twin." Darius Cole leaned against a window, counting regrets. Cass Harrow arrived uninvited in a black dress like a ceasefire flag. Lila's smile thinned. "This is family." Cass replied, "Family is what you don't have to bribe." The line was caught by a phone camera before the elevator doors had time to close again. Marcus said, "Dramatic entrances make for good exits." Cass ignored him, eyes on Darius. Lila lifted her glass, pearls catching the chandelier light. Cass turned without another word, the murmur following her into the lift. Outside, the city waited like an accomplice. The diner smelled of coffee and old rain. Nora Quinn said to the union rep, "Help me help your people." He said, "Harrow plants poisoned a river. Your client bathed in the dividends." Nora replied, "She was in boarding school when those contracts were signed." He shook his head. "She inherited the weather and the storm, not my sympathy." Nora said, "Give me the safety reports you kept when Mercer shredded his." He slid a thin manila folder across the formica. "If your truth is clean, it won't mind being wet." Outside, truck lights smeared across the glass. Nora placed the folder into her briefcase like it might bruise. The waitress refilled their cups without asking. The rain kept time against the roof. The safety reports lay open like a wound on the evidence cart. Nora Quinn said, "Detective Mercer, where are the missing pages?" His jaw flexed. "I produced all in my possession." She leaned in, but not all that existed. He shifted, avoiding her gaze. "Clerical oversight," he muttered. Marcus Bell rose. "Relevance?" Judge Helena Ward's gavel hand hovered. Sustained on tone, overruled on substance. The jury leaned forward as if gravity had shifted toward the truth. Cass Harrow's fingers tapped the table, silent percussion to her counsel's rhythm. Nora said, "Show the court the break in your own log." Mercer glanced at the papers, as if they might rearrange themselves. Lila Harrow's pearl strand caught the light, still as ice. Rafael Ortiz, behind the bar, scribbled a note that looked like a noose. Judge Ward said, "Proceed." Nora held the gap on display, letting the silence sharpen. Cass's pulse matched the ticking wall clock. Rafael Ortiz stepped into Pam Wilcox's studio, walls covered in tabloid clippings like pinned butterflies. "You threatened a juror," he said. Pam smiled. "I informed a citizen." He stepped closer. "Off the record." She leaned into the mic. "There's no off when the red light's on." He reached past her, flicking the switch to DA. The silence dropped heavy. Pam's eyes narrowed. "They'll chew you the same as me," Rafael said. "I want to taste my choices." She leaned back, hands off the controls. Outside, traffic noise pressed against the glass. On the desk, her recorder blinked once before dying. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air, mixing with the sting of withheld words. Darius Cole sat straighter on the stand, voice steady. The payments labeled "Community Outreach," ordered by Lila Harrow. A murmur rippled like fire in dry grass. Judge Ward's palm cut it short. Marcus Bell said, "You expect us to believe a grieving aunt engineered bribes?" Darius replied, "Grief makes saints of the least deserving." Lila's lips twitched, almost a smile but sharper. Cass Harrow's gaze fixed on her aunt, searching for any crack. Nora Quinn leaned forward, pen still. Rafael Ortiz in the gallery jotted direct hit beside a star. Judge Ward said, "The record will note the statement." Cass whispered, "If this is the truth, it's been wearing perfume too long." The court stenographer's keys clattered like teeth in the cold. During recess, Marcus Bell cornered Cass Harrow near the humming water fountain. "Plead to manslaughter, keep your fortune, lose only your soul." Cass said, "You traded yours for votes." He smiled thinly. "I collect them like debts." Cass said, "Then collect this." "No deal." His eyes cooled. "You'll regret your pride." She replied, "It's not pride to refuse a lie." He stepped back, suit uncreased. From the shadowed alcove, Rafael Ortiz emerged. "He expects you to fold. Folding is easier to televise." Cass said, "I'm done making good television." The fountain gurgled, spilling over into silence. In the winter park, breath fogged between Cass Harrow and Maya. Dawn. "Did you do it?" Maya asked. "No," Cass said. "Then why does everyone sound so sure?" Cass said, "Because sure sells." Maya's hands were deep in her hoodie pocket. "You chose the company over me." Cass's voice caught. "I chose survival, and I was wrong." Maya's eyes softened, but stayed wary. "If you burn it down, what's left?" Cass said, "You." The streetlight hummed overhead. Maya said, "Then don't lose me to save yourself." Cass nodded, the promise slipping into the cold air between them. The branches above rattled like an unseen jury. Rafael Ortiz dropped surveillance stills on Nora Quinn's desk, the grainy frames showing Marcus Bell entering Lila Harrow's penthouse. Nora's eyes narrowed. "Disclosure demands we had this yesterday." Rafael said, "Yesterday had a different price." Cass Harrow, leaning on the desk, asked, "How much did honesty cost you today?" Rafael answered, "A friend." Nora slid the images into a red folder. "Then let's spend it well." Cass glanced at the clock, feeling the trial's tempo accelerate. Outside, rain streaked the glass in silver threads. Rafael said, "Belle's been feeding her strategy under the table." Nora said, "We'll file a motion before they eat lunch." Cass's jaw set. "They won't get to finish it." The folder hit the clerk's desk like a gavel. In court, Nora Quinn said, "The prosecutor's private meetings with a key beneficiary are not optics, they are contamination." Marcus Bell straightened. "I attended to console a citizen." Nora's voice cut. "You practice consolation with a valet." Judge Helena Ward leaned forward. "Counselors, I will not preside over a public relations brawl. Produce explanations with dates." The gallery murmured like a tide against stone. Lila Harrow sat motionless, gaze fixed on Nora, pearls unblinking. Cass Harrow felt the jury's eyes flick between counsel like a metronome tracking blame. Rafael Ortiz in the back row wrote, conflict established. In chambers, June Whittaker stood small before the judge. Your Honor, I must disclose. My brother died at Harrow West 2 years ago. Judge Ward's expression hardened. You will be excused. The state will explain how this slipped through. Marcus Bell said, administrative oversight. Nora Quinn murmured, another one. Cass Harrow's chest tightened. I'm not sure what hurts more, that she stayed silent or that she needed to. Judge Ward said, Justice is allergic to secrets, Miss Harrow. So am I. June left without looking back, the door clicking shut like a verdict. Back in court, Darius Cole said, Victor planned to step down and hand Cass control, with conditions for environmental reparations. Marcus Bell snapped, only the dead can promise heaven. Nora Quinn countered, the living can pay for hell. The court reporter paused, shaking out her wrists. Cass Harrow pictured her father's voice on that recorder. In case courage comes late. It felt like it had arrived on time. Lila Harrow's eyes narrowed, pearls still in place. The jury shifted in their seats, the weight of legacy settling. Trent Avery's broadcast played on a wall of televisions in a downtown electronics store, splicing motel audio into a villain's monologue. Cass Harrow stared at her own face, edited into guilt. He made me a villain in 10 edits, she said. Nora Quinn replied, we don't try cases on his channel. Rafael Ortiz added, jurors have televisions. Cass nodded. Then, let them see me choose people over profit in open court. Nora's gaze sharpened. You'll testify. Cass's voice dropped. I'll bleed. Outside, rain mirrored the screens. Cass Harrow took the stand, the wood beneath her palms warm from others before her. My father taught me how to win, she said, voice steady, but not why winning should be earned. Marcus Bell stepped closer. Did you want control of Harrow? Yes. His smile sharpened. And what stood in your way? Cass replied, a history of harm I didn't cause but would inherit. Nora Quinn rose. Did you conspire to kill Victor Harrow? Cass met the jury's eyes. No, whoa. The room felt like a held breath. Lila Harrow sat motionless, her pearls a frozen halo. Rafael Ortiz scribbled, candor as weapon. Marcus paced slowly, searching for the loose thread that wasn't there. Cass said nothing more, letting silence draw its own line. Judge Helena Ward's gavel rested untouched. Nora Quinn lifted a small recorder from an evidence bag. Authenticate the voice. The audio expert nodded, adjusting headphones. A crackled voice filled the room. Victor Harrow's regret made public. Lila, you win, unless Cass learns what we paid. Marcus Bell stood. Hearsay. Judge Ward's reply was flat. Overruled. Lila's hand stilled on her pearls, fingers slack for the first time. Cass Harrow felt the weight of every moment she doubted herself lift a fraction. Rafael Ortiz's pen froze, mid-note. Nora pressed stop, the silence ringing louder than the voice. The jury leaned forward, their eyes catching on Lila's stillness. Marcus's jaw set hard, hiding the impact. Cass's breath came easier. Darius Cole's voice carried a truth that bent the air. Victor wasn't murdered. He was coerced into an inspection after a safety interlock was disabled. The jury stiffened. He died because the shortcut saved money. Darius swallowed. I ordered it on Lila's instruction to push a quarterly number. Marcus Bell leaned forward. You're bartering sin for leniency. Darius met his eyes. I'm bartering truth for sleep. Cass Harrow's vision narrowed, until all she saw was a balance sheet paid in lives. Lila's face was pale, but still carved from control. Rafael Ortiz underlined a name twice. Judge Ward's pen paused over her notes. The gallery shifted like a single restless animal. Closing arguments drew the room taut. Marcus Bell said, empires don't kill. People do, painting Cass as ambition with a pulse. Nora Quinn waited for his echo to fade. Empires kill when people hide inside them, she said, lifting the recorder, the forged will, and the safety reports. These are not accidents, they are choices. The jury sat in stillness, their faces half in shadow, half in light. Cass Harrow watched them, knowing her future now lived in their paws. Lila Harrow's eyes never left the exhibits. Rafael Ortiz wrote, "Knife in daylight." Judge Ward's gaze swept the room like a lighthouse before she called the recess. The verdict arrived in a silence so thick it felt physical. The foreperson stood. Not guilty. Cass Harrow's breath broke into a laugh and sob at once. Judge Ward said, "This court refers evidence regarding Ms. Lila Harrow and others to the grand jury." Marcus Bell's smile cracked like porcelain. Lila sat very still, the pearls now an anchor. Nora Quinn's hand squeezed Cass's shoulder once. Rafael Ortiz nodded from the gallery. A quiet victory. Cass said softly, "What now?" Nora replied, "Now we build something that doesn't require a eulogy to run." Outside, the winter light was brighter than it had been in months. Outside the courthouse, microphones bloomed like flowers with teeth. Cass Harrow faced the swarm. "The company I inherit will pay what it owes." A reporter yelled, "Are you confirming systemic fraud?" Cass said, "I'm confirming human cost." Rafael Ortiz murmured, "You just declared war on your board." Cass replied, "Then let them meet me where they buried their ethics." Cameras clicked like gunfire. Pam Wilcox, recorder in hand, spoke softly into it. "Sometimes redemption sounds like a promise nobody wants to keep." Cass's coat fluttered in the winter wind, her words already spinning into headlines. Nora Quinn's gaze swept the crowd, measuring friend from foe. Cass stepped down into the throng, unflinching. In the boardroom, the glass walls reflected a company unsure of itself. Cass Harrow stood at the head of the table. "We will create a restitution fund." Lila Harrow entered, flanked by counsel. "You think a verdict gives you virtue?" Cass said, "It gives me a mandate to clean." A director muttered, "Share price bleeds when you talk like that." Cass replied, "We've bled people for profit. The price was never ours." Lila's jaw tightened. "You won a courtroom and lost a company." Cass leaned forward. "Watch me lose better than you ever won." The silence after was heavy as stone. Marcus Bell stood in a press room, the state seal behind him. "Our office's integrity is unwavering," he declared. Nora Quinn watched from the back row and whispered to Rafael Ortiz, "He'll survive. Machines do." Rafael replied, "Machines break." In custody, Darius Cole spoke to Cass during a permitted call. "I can live with a cell if I don't share it with my lies." Cass said, "Tell the grand jury everything." Darius asked, "Even the parts that make me cruel?" She answered, "Especially those." His laugh was brief but clean, cutting through the static. In Cass Harrow's small kitchen, sunlight poured across the table. She plated eggs the way Maya liked. "I want us to move somewhere that smells like rain, not lawsuits." Maya said, "Show up even when no one's filming." Cass nodded. "I will." Maya smirked. "Then maybe we can keep the name and lose the noise." They ate in companionable quiet, the sound of forks and the hum of the fridge, the only witnesses. Outside, the day held no cameras. Weeks later, Cass Harrow stood in the empty Harrow Industries lobby. "You are a building, not a god," she said to the echo. She pressed the intercom. "Effective immediately, we suspend operations to audit harm and pay repair." Outside, workers gathered, not cheering, but waiting. "We'll do this with you or not at all," Cass said. The vast space answered only with silence. She felt her father's last message become her first. "Let the Empire answer to the lives it used to hide," she whispered, and walked toward the doors.